Commander Vekthar stood at the edge of the landing platform, watching the human transport ships descend through the orange sky of Talvis Prime. His scales rippled with barely contained irritation. 200 of his best Arulian warriors waited behind him, disciplined and silent, as proper soldiers should be. The humans, he had heard, were neither disciplined nor silent. The war against the Scourge had been going poorly for 3 years now. The insectoid swarm consumed everything in its path, and the Arulian fleets had been pushed back, system after system. When the humans offered military support, the Council had accepted. Vekthar thought it was a mistake. These newcomers had only been in space for 50 years. What could they possibly teach a species that had waged war for 10,000? The transport ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. Human soldiers marched out in loose formation, their armor scratched and painted with strange symbols. They carried primitive kinetic weapons that threw metal slugs instead of proper plasma. Vekthar's translator unit crackled as their commander approached. Commander Vekthar, Captain Hyunwoo, Terran Defense Force. The human extended his hand in that strange custom of theirs. Vekthar took it briefly, noting the calluses and the strong grip. At least, this one had seen combat. Captain, my soldiers are ready to begin joint operations. Vekthar gestured to his warriors. We will show you proper defensive doctrine. Hyunwoo smiled, and something about that expression made Vekthar uncomfortable. Looking forward to learning from you, Commander. Let me introduce my officers. A female human stepped forward, her dark hair pulled back severely. Lieutenant Jisoo, Tactical Operations. Her eyes were sharp, constantly scanning their surroundings. A warrior's eyes, Vekthar admitted. Sergeant Dae-sung, Infantry Commander. This human was older, his face marked with scars. He nodded at Vekthar, but said nothing. His smile was wrong somehow. Like a predator's expression. Private Mina, Medical Officer. The youngest of them, she seemed soft and gentle. Vekthar wondered how she had survived military service. The briefing room was too small for comfort. Vekthar pulled up the tactical display, showing the shield generator complex they were assigned to defend. This facility protects the civilian evacuation zone. Standard defense protocol requires overlapping fields of fire and fallback positions every 50 meters. Hyunwoo studied the map. What about close assault positions here and here? He pointed to areas that would put soldiers dangerously close to enemy lines. Unnecessary risk, Vekthar said. We maintain distance and use superior firepower. Respectfully, Commander, if they breach the perimeter, firepower won't matter. Jisoo's fingers danced across her datapad. We should prepare for close combat contingencies. Vekthar's tail twitched in annoyance. The Scourge do not breach Arulian lines. Dae-sung laughed, a harsh sound. Everything breaches every line eventually. That's why we have bayonets. The first patrol was routine. Vekthar led a mixed squad through the forest surrounding the generator. His soldiers moved in perfect formation, weapons ready, scanning for threats. The humans wandered more, talking quietly among themselves, sometimes making jokes. It set his teeth on edge. Contact front. The sensor operator's warning came seconds before the Scourge burst from the undergrowth. 6 of the insectoid creatures, each the size of a human, their mandibles clicking as they charged. Vekthar's warriors opened fire immediately, plasma bolts turning 2 creatures to ash. The humans fired their slug throwers, the loud bangs echoing through the trees. 1 creature fell, then another. But 2 reached the human position. What happened next would stay in Vekthar's memory forever. Instead of falling back to regroup, the humans surged forward. Dae-sung slammed his rifle butt into a Scourge's face, then drew a long knife and drove it into the creature's throat. Another human soldier grappled with the second creature, both of them crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs and chitin. It was over in seconds. The Scourge were dead. But so was 1 human, his chest torn open by mandibles. His squad mates pulled his body away, with grim efficiency. First blood to us, Daesung said, wiping green ichor from his knife. Vecthar stared at him. You took unnecessary casualties. Close combat is inefficient. Close combat is inevitable, Hyunwoo said quietly. We train for it, because we know plasma bolts don't always stop them fast enough. That night, Vecthar reviewed the combat footage. He watched the humans throw themselves at enemies that any rational soldier would keep at range. They fought with a ferocity that seemed disconnected from tactical sense. Yet they had won. Messily, bloodily, but they had won. The emergency alarm woke him 3 hours before dawn. He rushed to the command center where Hyunwoo and Jisoo were already studying sensor data. What is it? Jisoo's face was pale. Long-range scans show a scourge megahive approaching. Estimate 100,000 units. Arrival in 48 hours. Vecthar felt his blood run cold. We need to evacuate immediately. Can't, Hyunwoo said. Civilian transports need 48 hours minimum. The shield generator has to stay online, or they're all dead. With our numbers? Vecthar looked at the tactical display. 200 Arulians, 150 humans, against 100,000 scourge. This is suicide. 3. Aske. Follow. Follow. Probably, Hyunwoo agreed. He looked at Vecthar with those strange human eyes. But those are our people down there. Our families. Our children. Vecthar thought of his duty, his honor, his species' long military tradition. The Arulians did not run from battle. But they also did not throw away lives uselessly. We stay, he heard himself say. We hold for 48 hours. Daesung grinned that unsettling grin. Now we're talking. Mina, prep the medical station for mass casualties. Jisoo, I want every weapon we've got zeroed and ready. Commander Vecthar, you might want to teach us those Arulian defensive formations. We're going to need every advantage we can get. Quote, as the meeting dispersed and soldiers rushed to prepare, Vecthar watched the humans work. They moved with purpose now, the casual attitude gone. They checked weapons, reinforced positions, and spoke in low, serious tones. He realized that everything before had been a mask. These humans had known this moment would come. They had been preparing for it all along. Private Mina passed by carrying medical supplies, and she gave him a small smile. Don't worry, Commander. We've been in tight spots before. We're still here. Vecthar wanted to feel reassured. Instead, he felt the first whisper of something he would later recognize as fear. Not fear of the scourge. Fear of what his allies might become when the fighting truly started. The sun was rising over Talvis Prime, painting the sky the color of blood. Somewhere beyond the horizon, 100,000 enemies were coming, and Vecthar stood shoulder to shoulder with creatures he was only beginning to understand. He checked his plasma rifle one more time and moved to his position on the wall. 48 hours. It seemed like forever, and no time at all. Dawn broke cold and clear over the shield generator complex. Vecthar had not slept. Neither had most of his soldiers. They stood at their positions along the defensive wall. Plasma rifles charged and ready. The humans occupied the eastern section. Their kinetic weapons pointed toward the forest. The sensor array began screaming warnings at exactly 600 hours. Vecthar pulled up the tactical display and felt his heart sink. 10,000 scourge units emerged from the tree line, a living wave of chitin and claws and hunger. All units, fire at will, he commanded. The Arulian line erupted in plasma fire. Bolts of superheated energy lanced across the killing field, turning scourge warriors to ash and slag. The creatures kept coming, climbing over the bodies of their fallen without hesitation. This was how the scourge fought. They had no concept of morale or retreat. They simply came until they won or died. The human weapons added their voices to the battle, a constant thunder of explosive propellant. Vecthar had thought kinetic weapons primitive, but he had to admit they were effective. Each slug punched through chitin armor, and the humans fired with surprising accuracy. For the first hour, the defense held. The scourge could not cross the killing field. Bodies piled up in front of the wall, creating obstacles that slowed the later waves. Vekthar allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps they could actually survive this. Then the eastern wall exploded. A scourge breacher unit, a massive creature the size of a transport, had burrowed underneath the defenses. It erupted from the ground directly in the human section, scattering soldiers and creating a gap in the wall. Smaller scourge poured through the opening, like water through a broken dam. Vekthar turned to send reinforcements, but what he saw stopped him cold. The humans were not retreating. They were charging. Sergeant Daesung led the counterattack, his face twisted into something between rage and joy. He fired his weapon until it clicked empty, then fixed a long blade to the end and ran straight at the scourge. Other humans followed, screaming battle cries in their language. They crashed into the enemy like a wave hitting rocks. Vekthar watched through his tactical display, unable to look away. A human soldier drove her knife into a scourge's eye, was thrown off, rolled, and came up swinging an entrenching tool like a club. Another human had lost his weapon entirely and was strangling a scourge warrior with his bare hands, even as the creature's claws tore into his armor. And they were laughing. Some of them were actually laughing as they fought. Vekthar had seen many species fight. The Korathi fought with cold precision. The Veln fought with ritualistic honor. The Arulians fought with disciplined efficiency. But this was something else entirely. This was violence, as an art form, brutal, and intimate, and terrifying. "Commander, we need to support them." His tactical officer's voice broke through his shock. "Yes. Second Company, move to reinforce the eastern section. Third Company, hold the line." Vekthar's training took over even as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The battle raged for hours. The scourge kept coming, and the defenders kept killing them. Private Mina ran through the crossfire again and again, dragging wounded soldiers to safety. She pulled an Arulian warrior twice her size out of danger, then went back for a human who had lost his legs. Bullets and claws and plasma bolts filled the air around her, but she never hesitated. Lieutenant Jisoo coordinated fire support from a damaged bunker, her voice calm over the radio even as the structure crumbled around her. When Scourge broke through to her position, she called in artillery strikes on her own location. The bombardment killed dozens of enemies and somehow, impossibly, she survived in a pocket of debris. By midday, the eastern wall was retaken. Bodies covered the ground so thickly that soldiers had to climb over them to move. The air stank of burned flesh and scourge ichor and human blood. Casualties were mounting. Vekthar had lost 40 soldiers, and his heart ached for each one. The humans had lost 62, nearly half their force. Yet the survivors showed no signs of breaking. They simply reloaded, checked their wounded, and prepared for the next wave. As evening fell, there was a brief lull in the fighting. The Scourge were regrouping, bringing up heavier units. Vekthar used the time to walk the defensive line, checking on his warriors and trying to understand his allies. He found Captain Hyun-woo sitting on a pile of rubble, staring at something in his hands. As Vekthar approached, he saw they were metal tags on chains. Human identification markers. "The dead," Hyun-woo said quietly. "I collect them. Someone needs to remember their names." Vekthar sat beside him, his tail curling around his feet. "You fight like madmen. Like you feel no fear." Hyun-woo laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "We feel fear. We feel all of it. That's why we fight the way we do. If we let the fear take control, we freeze. So we push through it. We turn it into something else. Into rage, into fuel." Hyun-woo looked at him with tired eyes. "We know we're probably going to die here. All of us. But if we're going to die anyway, we might as well make it count. We'll take as many of those things with us as we can." Around them, human soldiers were fortifying positions. Vekthar watched them work with salvaged materials. Using pieces of destroyed Scourge warriors, to reinforce walls. Nothing was wasted. They turned death into defenses. A group of humans sat together near a fire, passing around food and water. They were singing something in their language, a slow and mournful tune. When it ended, they started telling stories, and laughter erupted from the group. How could they laugh? How could they sing? 40 of their brothers and sisters were dead. And they sang? Sergeant Dae Sung approached, his arm wrapped in bloody bandages. Commander Vekthar, we need to talk about ammunition. At this rate, we'll be out by tomorrow noon. What will you do then? Dae Sung showed that terrible smile again. We've still got knives. And rocks. And teeth. If it comes to that. Vekthar believed him. That was the disturbing part. He absolutely believed this human would fight with his teeth if necessary. The night watch was quiet, except for the distant clicking of Scourge in the darkness. They were out there, circling, probing for weaknesses. Vekthar stood on the wall beside a human soldier named Tae Min, a young male who hummed softly as he watched the forest. Aren't you afraid? Vekthar asked. Tae Min considered the question. Sure. But I'm more afraid of letting my friends down. Dae Sung saved my life on New Kyoto. Mina patched me up after Arcturus. Hyun-woo talked me out of quitting after my first battle. I'm not fighting for some abstract cause. I'm fighting because they're here, and I won't abandon them. It clicked into place then, a piece of understanding. The Arulians fought for duty and honor. These humans fought for each other. It made them unpredictable, reckless, dangerous, but it also made them unbreakable in a way Vekthar had never encountered. He thought about the next day, about the remaining 36 hours, thought about the 90,000 Scourge still approaching, thought about the humans laughing and singing and sharpening their knives. For the first time in his long military career, Vekthar was not sure they would lose. They probably would. The numbers were impossible, but standing here beside these strange, violent, compassionate creatures, he could almost believe in miracles. The night deepened, and the stars came out. Vekthar checked his weapon and prepared for what morning would bring. The second day arrived with fire and screaming. Vekthar barely had time to raise his weapon before the main Scourge force hit them. 50,000 units, more than he had ever seen in one place. They came from all directions at once, a living tide that blocked out the ground beneath their bodies. The defensive walls disappeared under waves of chitin and claws within minutes. Plasma fire and kinetic rounds tore into the enemy. But for every Scourge that fell, 3 more took its place. The kill count didn't matter when the enemy had bodies to spare. All units, fall back to secondary positions. Vekthar's voice cracked over the radio. Around him, his soldiers retreated in good order, laying down covering fire as they moved. The humans pulled back too, but slower, always turning to fire one more shot, always covering each other. By midday, they had lost the outer defensive ring entirely. Vekthar counted his remaining forces. 110 Arulians, 47 humans. Against tens of thousands. We need to pull back to the inner bunker, he told Hyun-woo during a brief pause. We can hold there for a few more hours. Hyun-woo looked at him, and there was something in his eyes that made Vekthar's scales prickle. We're not done yet, Commander. Look at the numbers. We cannot win this. Winning isn't about numbers. Hyun-woo pulled up his tactical display. It's about time. We need 24 more hours. So we're going to give them 24 more hours. Sergeant Dae Sung gathered the remaining human soldiers. They huddled together, speaking in low voices. Vekthar saw them nodding. Faces grim, but determined. When they dispersed, they moved with purpose, spreading throughout the complex. What are they doing? Vekthar asked Lieutenant Jisoo, who was coordinating from a half-collapsed command post. She looked up at him, blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead. Preparing contingencies. You might want to evacuate your people from sectors 4 and 7. Why? Trust me. Vekthar didn't understand, but he gave the order. His soldiers pulled back, and he watched the humans work. They were placing charges, rigging explosives, wiring detonators to every structural support they could find. They were turning the entire complex into a weapon. Private Mina appeared carrying containers from the medical station. Vekthar recognized some as standard medicine, but others were labeled with chemical formulas he didn't understand. "What is that?" Mina's face was apologetic but firm. "Nerve agent. Synthesized from medical supplies. It disrupts Scourge motor control." Vekthar felt cold. "That's a chemical weapon. That's forbidden by galactic law. So is genocide." Mina met his eyes. "Those civilians down there don't care about galactic law. They just want to live." Captain Hyunwoo approached. "Commander, I know this isn't how your people fight, but we don't have the luxury of fighting clean. We have 24 hours to hold this position against an enemy that outnumbers us 1,000 to 1. We'll hold it. By any means necessary." Vekthar wanted to object. The Arulians had rules, traditions, honor codes, developed over 10,000 years of warfare. What the humans were proposing violated all of them. But he thought of the 50,000 civilians evacuating below. Thought of the younglings, and the elderly, and the sick, who couldn't fight. "Do what you must," he said finally. The humans smiled, and Vekthar felt the first real stab of fear. Not fear of the Scourge. Fear of his allies. The attack resumed at 1400 hours. The Scourge poured into the complex, filling corridors and chambers with their bodies. They should have overrun the defenders in minutes. Instead, they ran into hell. Daesung's team lured a massive wave into Sector 4, then brought down the entire building on top of them. Thousands of Scourge died under tons of rubble. The survivors who clawed their way free found themselves in prepared kill zones, caught in crossfire from 3 directions. Lieutenant Jisoo had somehow hacked into the Scourge pheromone network. She sent false signals that confused their coordination, making them attack in smaller groups instead of organized waves. When they did mass together, she triggered chemical weapons that left them twitching and paralyzed. Vekthar watched from a defensive position as Mina deployed her nerve agents. The gentle medic who had saved so many lives moved calmly through the chaos, placing canisters and setting timers. She was humming softly to herself. That same tune from last night. The contrast between her demeanor and her actions made Vekthar's blood run cold. A Scourge warrior caste broke through near his position, its armored bulk smashing through barricades. Vekthar raised his plasma rifle, but Sergeant Daesung got there first. The human's left arm hung useless at his side, broken in 3 places. He held his combat knife in his right hand and threw himself at the creature. What followed was brutality in its purest form. Daesung stabbed and slashed with precision born of desperation, targeting joints and sensory organs. The Scourge knocked him down. He rolled, came up, kept attacking. His face showed no fear, no hesitation. Just cold, calculated violence. When the creature finally died, Daesung pulled his knife free and moved to the next threat without pausing. Vekthar found himself fighting beside Hyunwoo as the Scourge pushed deeper into the complex. They were in a narrow corridor, back to back, plasma and bullets keeping the enemy at bay. A warrior caste lunged at Vekthar, claws extended to tear out his throat. Hyunwoo threw himself in the way, taking the strike meant for Vekthar. The claws raked across his armor, punching through in several places. Blood sprayed, but Hyunwoo jammed his rifle under the creature's mandibles and pulled the trigger repeatedly until it stopped moving. "Why?" Vekthar caught him as he stumbled. "Why sacrifice yourself for me?" Hyunwoo coughed blood but managed a smile. "Because you're my brother now. We bleed together." He pushed away from Vekthar and kept fighting, wounds leaking, but weapons steady. In that moment, Vekthar understood something profound and terrifying about humanity. They didn't fight for abstract concepts like honor or duty. They fought for the person beside them, for their squad, their unit, their friends. And once they decided you were one of theirs, they would die before they let you fall. This made them far more dangerous than any warrior race in the galaxy. Because honor could be satisfied, duty could be fulfilled. But love? Love was infinite and uncompromising, and absolutely merciless to anything that threatened its object. The sun set on the second day, painting the sky red through the smoke and fire. Casualties continued to mount. 110 Arulians had become 73. 47 humans had become 22. But the Scourge? The Scourge had lost over 30,000. Vekthar stood in what remained of the command center, looking at tactical displays that showed enemy forces still surrounding them. Still coming. Always coming. Lieutenant Jisoo limped in, her leg clearly broken but supported by a makeshift brace. She had been fighting from a collapsed bunker for 6 hours, refusing evacuation. Now she calmly updated the defensive plans, marking new kill zones and fallback positions. 18 hours left, she said. Her voice was steady, professional, as if she wasn't covered in blood and standing on a broken leg. As if this was just another training exercise. Vekthar looked at the humans around him. Dae-sung with his shattered arm. Mina with severe burns from handling her chemical weapons. Hyun-woo, bleeding from a dozen wounds. All of them still fighting, still planning, still refusing to break. They weren't soldiers anymore, he realized. They had become something else. Something primal and unstoppable. They had looked at impossible odds and decided those odds didn't matter. They had made a promise to hold this position, and they would keep that promise or die trying, probably detrying. And the terrifying part? They knew it. They accepted it. And they kept fighting anyway. Vekthar checked his weapon and moved back to his position. 18 hours. It seemed like an eternity. The Scourge were coming again. He could hear them in the darkness. And beside him, the humans were preparing to meet them. He was afraid. More afraid than he had ever been. Not of death, but of what his allies were becoming. Of what they were willing to do. Of the line between soldier and monster, and how easily the humans stepped across it. The night closed in, and the battle continued. The night of the second day became something out of nightmares. All outer defenses were gone. The Scourge had pushed into the shield facility itself, filling the corridors with their chittering bodies. Vekthar and his remaining soldiers fought room by room, corridor by corridor, giving ground slowly and at terrible cost. Ammunition was running out. His plasma rifle had maybe 30 shots left. Around him, human soldiers were down to their last magazines. Some had already switched to blades and makeshift weapons. The facility echoed with gunfire and screaming and the endless clicking of Scourge mandibles. Vekthar's left arm hung useless, a Scourge claw having torn through muscle and tendon. He held his rifle one-handed and kept firing. Beside him, 3 Arulian warriors formed a defensive triangle, protecting the wounded who couldn't fight anymore. A cry went up from the human section. Vekthar couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Something had gone wrong. He found the humans gathered in a ruined hallway. They stood in a circle around something on the ground. As Vekthar pushed through, he saw Captain Hyun-woo lying in a pool of blood. His chest had been torn open by a warrior cast. His eyes were still open but no longer seeing. The humans were silent, completely silent. Lieutenant Jisoo knelt beside Hyun-woo, closed his eyes gently, and removed his identification tags. She stood slowly, her broken leg clearly causing agony she refused to acknowledge. When she looked at the other humans, her face was empty of emotion. Dae-sung is in command, she said quietly. Sergeant Dae-sung stepped forward. His broken arm was now amputated below the elbow. A rough field surgery that had probably saved his life. He looked at Hyun-woo's body for a long moment, then at his soldiers. "No prisoners," he said. His voice was flat, cold, devoid of humanity. "No mercy, no retreat. We make them remember this place. We make them remember what it costs to kill humans." The other soldiers nodded. Something had changed in them. The laughter was gone. The songs were gone. Even the grim determination was gone. What remained was something cold and purposeful and absolutely terrifying. They stopped defending. They started hunting. Vekthar watched Private Mina walk into a corridor filled with scourge, carrying nothing but a knife. She moved like water, dodging claws and mandibles, her blade finding gaps in chitin armor with surgical precision. When a warrior knocked her down, she wrapped her legs around its neck and squeezed until it stopped moving. No hesitation. No fear. Just mechanical, efficient violence. Lieutenant Jisoo abandoned her command post and moved to the front lines despite her broken leg. She had run out of ammunition hours ago. Now she fought with a scourge pincer blade she had torn from a dead enemy, using it like a sword. Her movements were awkward, off balance, but effective. She never stopped moving forward. Sergeant Dae-sung led assaults into scourge-held sections with the remaining human soldiers. They pushed forward, not defending their position but attacking, taking the fight to the enemy. Vekthar watched them disappear into the darkness of the lower levels, heard gunfire and screaming, and saw them emerge covered in green ichor, dragging more weapons stripped from scourge bodies. The humans were singing again. But it was different now. The songs were harsh and rhythmic, something between a war chant and a funeral dirge. They sang as they killed. They sang as they advanced. They sang as they died. Vekthar fought beside them and felt something he had never experienced before. Not fear of death, fear of life. Fear of what living things could become when they let go of everything that made them civilized. He cornered Dae-sung during a brief lull, grabbing the human by his remaining arm. "What happened to you? You've lost yourselves. You're not soldiers anymore. You're monsters?" Dae-sung finished. His eyes were empty. "Yeah, we are. That's what happens when you kill our family. Hyun-woo was my friend for 10 years. He was Jisoo's mentor." "So you become like them? You become beasts?" Dae-sung smiled, and it was the most frightening thing Vekthar had ever seen. "No, Commander. We become worse. The scourge kill because it's their nature. They're animals. But we know exactly what we're doing. We choose this. We choose to become monsters. Because it's the only way to make monsters afraid." He pulled free and moved back toward the fighting, calling his soldiers to him. They followed without question, moving deeper into scourge territory. Vekthar leaned against a wall, his whole body shaking. He had spent 300 years as a soldier. He had seen every form of warfare his species had developed. But this was something beyond war. This was hate made manifest. This was love turned inside out, becoming a weapon. The humans had loved their captain. So when he died, that love didn't disappear. It transformed, became fuel for a fire that would burn everything in its path. A young Arulian soldier approached, his scales pale with shock. "Commander, what do we do? The humans, they're not following any tactics. They're just attacking. They're going to get themselves killed." Vekthar looked at the tactical display. It showed human biosigns scattered throughout the facility, often deep in scourge-controlled areas. They should all be dead. Yet the scourge casualty count kept rising. "We support them," Vekthar said finally. "We cover their advances. We protect their wounded. We fight beside them. But sir, they're dying for those civilians down below. The least we can do is die beside them." The fighting continued through the night. Vekthar lost track of time. Minutes became hours, became an eternity of violence. His rifle finally ran dry, so he picked up a human kinetic weapon from a dead soldier. The recoil bruised his shoulder, but it still fired, and that was all that mattered. He saw Mina pull herself up from under a dead scourge, both arms broken, and use her legs to strangle another enemy. He saw Jisoo throw herself onto a breacher's back, driving her blade into its brain over and over until both of them fell. He saw Dae-sung, covered head to toe in blood, laughing as he fought 3 warrior castes at once. And he understood. Finally, truly understood. The humans weren't becoming monsters. They were revealing what they had always been, a species that could be gentle and loving and kind. But underneath that, always and forever, they were predators. Apex predators who remembered being prey. Who knew what it was like to be hunted, who would never, ever let it happen again. The Arulians had evolved on a world where they were dominant from the beginning. They had never known real fear, real desperation. But humans? Humans climbed from the bottom of their food chain to the top. They remembered every step of that climb, and they would kill anything that tried to push them back down. Vecthar collapsed against a wall as dawn approached, his body screaming with pain and exhaustion. 4 hours left until evacuation. 73 Arulians had become 41. 22 humans had become 7. 7 humans still standing, still fighting, still refusing to break. He watched them gather in what remained of the command center, taking stock of weapons and ammunition. Day sung with one arm. Jisoo barely able to stand. Mina with both arms in improvised slings. The others equally damaged but still moving, still planning the next defense. They looked at Vecthar, and he looked back. For a moment, they were all just soldiers. Tired, wounded, probably dying soldiers, but soldiers who had decided that this place, this moment, was where they made their stand. 4 more hours, Daesung said. Then we can all go home. Vecthar knew it was a lie. They all knew it was a lie. But they nodded anyway, checked their weapons, and moved back to their positions. The sun was rising somewhere above the smoke and fire. The Scourge were coming again, flowing like a river through the broken facility. And Vecthar stood shoulder to shoulder with 7 humans who had looked at the abyss and jumped willingly into its depths. He raised his borrowed human weapon and prepared to jump with them. The third dawn came with blood and fire and the sound of something massive moving through the ruins. Vecthar pulled himself to his feet, every part of his body screaming in protest. Around him, the remaining defenders gathered in what was left of the shield generator core room. 41 Arulians. 7 humans. This was all that remained of 350 soldiers. The sensor arrays were mostly destroyed. But what remained showed something that made Vecthar's blood run cold. A massive biosignature approaching. Larger than anything they had faced before. Scourge Queen, Lieutenant Jisoo said quietly, reading the same data. She's coming. Personally. Sergeant Daesung laughed, a harsh sound that held no humor. Guess we made her mad. The Queen arrived with 500 elite guard warriors. She was enormous, 3 times the size of a normal Scourge, her carapace thick and ancient. As she entered the generator complex, the fighting stopped. Her warriors spread out, surrounding the core room but not attacking. Waiting. The Queen moved forward until she could see the defenders. Vecthar watched her study them with compound eyes that held disturbing intelligence. She clicked and chittered, and his translator unit struggled to process the alien language. What stops my children? The translation was rough, but understandable. You are few. You should be consumed. Yet, you remain. Why? Sergeant Daesung stepped forward, his one remaining arm hanging at his side. His armor was destroyed, his body broken, but he stood straight. When he spoke, his voice carried across the ruined chamber. Because we made a promise. To hold this place. To protect our people. And we keep our promises. The Queen tilted her massive head. Foolish. You cannot win. You will die here. Probably. He raised his hand, showing a detonator. Around the core room, Vecthar saw for the first time what the humans had been preparing during the long night. Every support structure was rigged with explosives. The entire facility was a bomb waiting to happen. You want this place? You can have it. In pieces. The Queen's warriors surged forward. 500 elite Scourge against 95 exhausted defenders. The mathematics were impossible. The outcome, certain. But mathematics didn't account for stubbornness. The humans moved first, throwing themselves at the enemy with everything they had left. Dae-Sung fired the last rounds in his weapon, then swung it like a club. When it broke, he used his remaining fist. Jisoo drove her stolen blade into warrior after warrior, her broken leg finally giving out but still fighting from the ground. Mina, both arms useless, kicked and bit and refused to stop moving. The Arulians followed their example. Vekthar found himself in the center of the fighting, using his rifle as a club after the power cell died. An Arulian warrior beside him went down, and Vekthar covered him, refusing to let the Scourge finish his soldier. A human he didn't know grabbed his arm and pulled him back from a warrior cast's claws, saving his life. There was no strategy anymore, no tactics, just desperate, brutal survival. Private Mina saw the Queen moving toward a cluster of wounded soldiers. Without hesitation, she ran toward the massive creature, somehow got onto its back, and triggered the remaining chemical weapon charges strapped to her body. The explosion wasn't large, but the nerve agent cloud that followed engulfed the Queen and her guard. Mina died in that cloud. So did 20 Scourge warriors. Lieutenant Jisoo held a corridor alone for 6 minutes, killing everything that tried to pass. When she finally fell, she had accounted for 32 enemies. Her last act was to trigger another set of charges, bringing down the ceiling on her position and blocking the corridor permanently. The fighting became a blur. Vekthar stopped counting enemies, stopped thinking about survival. He simply fought for the soldier beside him, for the promise they had made, for something he couldn't name but felt burning in his chest. A warrior caste slashed across his back, sending him sprawling. He tried to rise, but couldn't. His body had finally given everything it could. He lay on the cold floor, watching the battle continue around him. Sergeant Dae-Sung stood over the Queen, his one hand empty now, his body covered in wounds that should have killed him hours ago. The Queen struck him, sending him flying. He rolled, came to his feet, and charged back at her. Again and again, refusing to stay down. The Queen's mandibles closed around his chest. Vekthar saw Dae-Sung look down at the mortal wound, then up at the Queen's eyes. He smiled that terrible smile one last time. "Worth it," he whispered, and triggered the detonator. The explosion tore through the generator core. Support structures collapsed. The ceiling came down in massive chunks. The shield generator itself, damaged beyond repair, finally died in a cascade of energy that vaporized everything near it. Vekthar felt the floor fall away beneath him, felt himself tumbling through darkness, felt pain and heat, and then nothing at all. He woke on an evacuation ship 3 days later. The medical bay was quiet and clean, so different from the hell he had left behind. His body was wrapped in regeneration, gel, tubes and monitors tracking his recovery. An Arulian medical officer saw him wake and immediately called for the doctor. "Commander Vekthar, you're lucky to be alive." The others? The doctor's expression told him everything before the words came. "We pulled 95 survivors from the generator complex. 41 made it to the ships. 31. Arulian. 7 human. 7. The number hit him like a physical blow. From 150 humans, only 7 remained. The civilians? All evacuated successfully. 50,000 souls. Safe, because you held that position for 49 hours. 7 hours longer than required. 49 hours. They had held 7 hours past when the evacuation finished, because the orbital bombardment couldn't start until the shield fell. They had held until the generator died, letting the fleet destroy the Scourge mega hive. "I need to see the human survivors." The doctor hesitated. "Commander, you need rest." Now, they brought him to the human section of medical in a wheelchair. His legs weren't strong enough to walk yet. The 7 survivors were there, in beds lined up in a row, all of them broken in various ways, all of them alive. Sergeant Dae Sung was awake, staring at the ceiling. His right arm and most of his chest were covered in regeneration gel. He turned his head when Vekthar approached. "Commander." "Barely." Vekthar moved his chair closer. "I watched you fight the Queen. I thought you were dead. Should be." Dae Sung smiled weakly. "Guess I'm too stubborn to die. They tell me we won. We held. The civilians escaped. The Scourge Hive is destroyed. Then it was worth it." Vekthar was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I was terrified of you. Of all of you. I still am." Dae Sung looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "Good. You should be. We terrify ourselves sometimes. What we're capable of. What we become, when we have to." Lieutenant Jisoo was awake in the next bed, her leg reconstructed with cybernetics. She spoke without looking at him. "But you stayed, Commander. You fought with us. That makes you human enough. Is that supposed to comfort me?" "No." Private Mina's voice came from the third bed, her arms slowly regenerating. She was smiling, that same gentle smile from before the fighting. "But you're our brother now. We'll always come when you call. That's what matters." Vekthar looked at the 7 survivors. Broken, damaged, haunted by what they had done and seen, but still smiling, still making jokes, still together. He thought about the humans who had died, Hyun-woo and the others, 143 soldiers who had given everything. He thought about watching them transform from gentle, laughing warriors into something cold and merciless. He thought about the terror he had felt, not from the enemy, but from his allies. "I don't understand your species," he said finally. "You can be so kind, so compassionate, and then you become monsters. That's the point." Dae Sung said quietly. "We choose which one we need to be. The universe tried to kill us for millennia, and we refused to die. We learned to be both, gentle with our friends, merciless with our enemies. And once you're our friend, once we decide you're pack, we'll become monsters to keep you safe." 10 years passed. Vekthar stood in his office as Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, looking at commendation reports. Human battalions were the most requested Allied troops across the front, not because they had the best technology, not because they were the strongest, but because every species knew, if humans stood with you, they would die before they let you fall. The war against the Scourge was turning, slowly, painfully, but turning. And humanity was at the front of every major battle, fighting with that same terrible combination of compassion and violence that Vekthar had witnessed. On his desk sat a human combat knife, a gift from Sergeant Dae Sung, now General Dae Sung, commander of the Human Expeditionary Forces. The inscription on the blade was in the human language, but Vekthar had memorized the translation. "Terror is just love with teeth." He understood now. The humans weren't scary because they were violent. Every species could be violent. They were scary because they loved so fiercely that they would become anything, sacrifice anything, transform into monsters, if that's what it took to protect what they loved. And Vekthar slept better knowing humanity guarded the frontier. Because yes, they were terrifying. Yes, they were unpredictable and reckless and capable of horrors that made other species uncomfortable. But they were also loyal beyond reason, brave beyond logic, and absolutely, completely, terrifyingly reliable. He had felt true terror fighting shoulder to shoulder with humanity. Terror at what they could become. Terror at what they were willing to do. Terror at the depths of violence they would sink to for those they called brother. But he had never felt safer than he did standing beside them. Because that same terror, that same capacity for violence, that same willingness to become monsters, it was all pointed at humanity's enemies. And Vekthar was no longer an enemy. He was family. The intercom buzzed. "Commander, General Dae Sung is here to see you. Send him in." The door opened, and the human general entered. his prosthetic arm moving smoothly. He had aged well, his hair going gray but his eyes still sharp. He saw the knife on Vekthar's desk and smiled. "Still keeping that old thing?" "Always," Vekthar said. "It reminds me of what real warriors look like." Dae Sung sat across from him. "Got a new mission." "Bad one. Scourge Superhive. 3 systems out. Going to need everything we have. Will you hold?" Dae Sung's smile was the same as it had been 10 years ago. Confident, dangerous, absolutely terrifying. "Commander, we're human. We always hold. The only question is how many we take with us." Vekthar looked at his old friend and brother and felt that familiar mix of terror and comfort. Terror at what humans were. Comfort because they were on his side. "Then, let's make them remember," he said. They stood together and walked out to plan the next battle. 2 species. 2 warriors. 2 survivors of Talvis Prime. Brothers in blood, bound by shared horror and absolute trust. The terror never went away, but Vekthar had learned to embrace it. Because terror, after all, was just love with teeth, and humanity loved with everything they had.